You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to get to connect with one of my all-time favorite writers. Once again, Kyle Mills. I think this is Kyle's 23rd appearance on the podcast. And he's got a brand new book that when you're hearing this is going to be available everywhere, and it's called Oath of Loyalty. We were just chatting a minute ago, and we didn't get a chance to connect last year when his book Enemy at the Gates came out, but we're going to talk about all that and bring readers up to speed today. Kyle, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Kyle, we last talked, I think it was the end of 2020 or the late summer, early fall of 2020. And, a lot of stuff was going on at the time, and I don't think any of us really had a grasp at that time, where the next couple of years would take us. And I know that you and your wife do a lot of traveling and, spend some extended amounts of time in the country, outside the country, and things like that. What was it like for you guys, this last couple of years?
Oh, it was really crazy. I have to say, we have been so lucky, though we did just get COVID like 3 weeks ago, finally. Wow. But for us, in a way, we got really lucky. We were not in Spain, where we live part-time, we were there right when it started, but not when it got bad there, because they really took the brunt of it at the beginning, and they had huge lockdowns, like really serious lockdowns. You couldn't leave your house for it's like a month or something. You could go to the grocery store, and that was about the doctor, and that was about it. But we had come back to the United States at that point, and we're in Wyoming, which was a pretty good place to weather it, because there's nobody here. It's just not a very crowded state, so you could still go out and do stuff. I mean, it's pretty easy to go out and never see a soul here.
Just you and the buffalo.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And, go out and backcountry ski or something. And we'd get together that's how we'd get together with friends. You go skiing or something. We'd be 6 feet away from each other. And then at the last minute, we were able to technically we're immigrants in Spain. We have essentially green cards, but we were going to lose them. And at the last minute, we managed to get a vaccine. We had to drive through a blizzard and all this for 3 hours into southern Wyoming, and we could get in because we were residents of Spain as long as we were vaccinated. And then we packed up all our stuff and we rented our house out, and it was really scary because you had to take a COVID test to get on the plane, and if we didn't pass, our residency was going to expire. So we were basically like, either we pass or our entire next year we're going to be living out of this rental car with 4 bags, because everything else is packed away, the house is rented, all that stuff. So we passed and got on a plane and made it back to Spain.
That is wild. I know that a lot of people have kind of dodged the idea of COVID in their fiction. And, I've heard arguments both ways. One, we all lived through it. We don't want to read about it. I get that. Other people, have included some of the things we went through, but in sort of veiled ways. And, as kind of a catharsis to kind of work through this thing that we've all been through together. Other folks are just like, I would never touch that. we don't want to read about it. How do you feel about including something in your books that we've all experienced?
I'm in a little bit of a unique situation in that, like 3 books ago ish, I wrote a book called Lethal Agent that was about a coronavirus. So that came out.
Thanks a lot, Kyle.
Yeah, I know. Geez, I wrote about a big blackout right before the Texas blackouts too. I'm on a streak. So in the Rapp verse, the universe that surrounds Mitch Rapp, I had already really discussed, the potential for a big coronavirus outbreak. So I think it would have been weird to then immediately go into, he stopped the plot. Oh, but everybody's got COVID now. So I decided it didn't really fit in the universe very well, and I've not mentioned it at all.
Do you think you ever will?
I don't. Certainly not in this series, because it is an alternate reality. I mean, if I hadn't written Lethal Agent, that would have been, I'm not sure what I'd have done. I'd have had to sit down with a drink and really think about what I wanted to do with that. But it was, I don't know, it was an interesting time, I guess, if you're looking for like thriller threats, because in a way the world calmed down. It was kind of strange. Nobody really wanted to start a war. Nobody wanted to do a mass shooting because, of coronavirus. And so I think you'd have to build all that in. It would be a little complicated.
Yeah. Speaking of, having a drink and sitting and thinking through things, do you, when you're beginning a new book, do you have moments like that where you're kind of playing the what if game, with maybe things that have been in the news or, things that you've read about and just kind of thinking how this would play out? What is that? You and I have talked before about kind of how you view character development and, what you're going to do with Mitch Rapp and the crew in each book and how they're going to progress forward. But when you're thinking of plot points and kind of these big stage situations that you're going to drop them into, what is that process like at the beginning?
I try to think about it really realistically. My background, strangely, is in economics. And economics is all about taking a bunch of variables and trying to figure out where they're going to go. What if you put all these things together, what's going to happen? And so I'm looking realistically for what's the next threat. And like I said, I've been on a bit of a run. I also wrote a book, Red War, about Russia starting war with Ukraine. So, and that wasn't that long ago. So, I'm constantly, scouring the news and thinking, what could happen next? And if I'm lucky, history doesn't get ahead of me. That's happened to me before. It just happened to me with these books, these most recent books. But that's the goal, because I wanted to feel realistic. That's what Vince did. He had these very, kind of, it's cliche, but it's true, ripped from the headlines plots. Yeah. And that's what I've always liked about, like reading Clancy and stuff, that you thought, oh my God, not only could this happen in the future, it might be happening right now and I don't know it, and right. That's the feel I want to impart. So when I come up with a threat, then I start thinking realistically, how would this play out? Whether I have to talk to people, who are experts in that area or whatever, or just read up on it more, like how would it really play out? And that, a lot of times writes a bunch of your books for you. If probably the big one was total power, where if the power went out throughout the United States, one, how would you do that? How would you accomplish it? And what would happen to the country and the people in it? You have to sort of plod along and think about how that would work.
Yeah. You mentioned Vince just a minute ago, and we know that Vince created Mitch Rapp and the Rapp verse, if you will. But with Oath of Loyalty, how many books is this that you've written in the Rapp series?
That'll be 8.
8. That's wild, because Vince wrote, was it 12 or 13?
Somewhere in there. I was thinking so, somewhere between 12 and 14. I don't know off the top of my head. The first one, Term Limits, wasn't a Mitch Rapp book. Yeah.
Well, at this rate, you're going to catch Vince in not too distant a future. How do you feel about kind of ownership of Mitch at this point? I mean, you have written a substantial amount in this series, and it's got to feel like you have as much ownership at this point as anyone.
I definitely feel like I know this character really well. I know this character better than any character I've ever created, because I never wrote this many books about characters. I tended to, honestly, it's sort of ironic, but I tended to stay away from series characters when I was writing on my own, because they're really hard to write. So yeah, I really do feel like I know this character really well. I love this character. I love all the other characters that run around the universe, Scott Coleman and Irene and Claudia and all these people. But ownership, I would say no. This has always kind of felt like the ship that Vince built, and I'm captaining it for a while.
That's a good way to think of it. I think that's I get that. When talking about how difficult it is to write a series character, because on one hand you need to keep the tension high enough that the reader feels like that this is serious. This could be life or death. There needs to be real jeopardy. But we also kind of assume that next summer, or early fall, we're going to have another Mitch Rapp book, which kind of works against you for maintaining that kind of tension and the thriller aspect of it. How do you weigh those two things?
Yeah, so many problems with writing a series. To me, there's two kinds of sort of thriller character. And, one is one that, in a one-off, that you're really worried that, every scene could be the death of this character. And that's where you get your excitement. To me, and I've compared Mitch to Josie Wales, the Clint Eastwood character, so many times. Right. But, you never worried that anybody was going to kill Josie Wales. You just wanted to see how he was going to kill them, right? And it's a really different vibe. Yeah, you're never sitting there thinking, oh, man, things look really dire for Mitch. This could be the end of him. It's much more, oh, how's he going to get out? I can't figure out how he's going to get out of this, but I know he is. And that's what makes you turn the pages.
Well, that's a, I get that. Your last book, Enemy at the Gates, and Oath of Loyalty feel to me like they are one cohesive story. And I know that the entire series obviously is a continuation, but these two books very much feel like they were possibly a story split into, and in a lot of ways. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, in a way that is true. And Vince has done, like you said, it's all one book, really. I mean, the whole series is just one really large book. And Vince had done the same thing with a few books where the arc was really strong between the two. I mean, the first book I wrote in the series, The Survivor, I mean, The Last Man, was the last book he wrote, was very much didn't finish the story. And then, mine, completed the story. So with this one, though, it was a little different. It was a little strange. So my goal, or what I had set out to do, was to write a trilogy within the series, an arc that was about the fall of American democracy, from within. Politicians, kind of power-hungry politicians, started, working their magic and were going to take over America and insert essentially a president for life. And so that I like thinking about how you would do these things. Maybe I'm a criminal at heart. And I wanted to think about how would I bring down democracy if I was the president of the United States. However, this is another example, we talk about you want to be at the cutting edge, but you don't want to get ahead of history. So I can't even remember. I think I'd probably finished the first draft or something, or getting close, when January 6th happened and there was all the talk about a stolen election and all that. And it just felt too on the nose. I really didn't think anybody was going to want to read that book after that. And also, if you'll ever notice in my books, I never talk about Democrats or Republicans. Those words never really enter into the book. And people will always try to say, well, you're writing about Trump or you're writing about Hillary Clinton or whatever. And it's not true. And I felt like in light of January 6th and all that, it looked like I was writing sort of a screed against Donald Trump, which I, really didn't want to do. So I went back and changed it so that it wouldn't be quite so on the nose, with the idea that it would be too much to change. And that with the next book, which is the one that's about to come out, Oath of Loyalty, I would kind of get out of that. Like I would finish the arc in a way that was very final, and all the stuff about the fall of democracy would kind of go into the background.
That's really interesting. The way you said that, that people would perceive that you were coming from a certain viewpoint when you were writing the book. The thing about reading and novels, especially, is that we read them through our personal lens, and whether you have any intention or not, we will interpret what we're reading through our worldview in a lot of ways. And when you know that there's a hot button issue, that there's a topic that's going to, people are going to come down one way or another, and that it's going to be divisive like that, how do you handle that? I mean, I know that you've decided to kind of dial back for a while and then continue that story later, but has that happened before, where that a certain thing is going to be divisive and there's just no way around it? You just have to kind of put out what you're going to put out.
Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time, because I do like to get into some controversial areas. So you kind of dance that middle line, you're on the fence and you stay there. And to me, the biggest compliment is when I get, I'll write a book and I'll get an email and somebody will just rage against me because, you were putting down Donald Trump. This is a big thing about Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And then like an hour later, I get one saying, you were putting down Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. It's just all about them. And so you're exactly right. I think the old saying is, no two people have ever read the same book. And that is absolutely true. I mean, I could put two people together that think, this president's Anthony Cook, that are absolutely certain that I was reading that Anthony Cook is just Donald Trump. And I could find the same number of people that think, it's Hillary Clinton. So that's what I go for, because I'm really uninterested in partisan politics. And these are global themes, these are, democracies fall. I think James Madison said that I think it was him that said all democracies eventually commit suicide. Yeah. But sometimes it comes from the right, sometimes it comes from the left. The important thing to focus on is the falling democracy, not who's doing it. It's like worrying about the politics of the guy who has a gun to your head. It's the trigger is the problem, the bullet.
Right. Anthony Cook, wow, what a great character. What were you thinking when you came up with that character?
He's an interesting character because I've always had a hard time with complete megalomaniacs because the farther you get away from yourself, the harder it is to, really inhabit a character.
Sure.
And there are so many people in the world who crave power for the sake of power. And I've never been one of those people. I think to me, power just seems like a ton of trouble. Like being president of the United States, I feel like would be the worst job in the world. It doesn't pay very well. It's just a ton of work. Everybody's always criticizing you. Why would anybody in their right mind want that job? So you have to kind of inhabit that character and think, why does he want this? Why does he just want power? And, you see examples of it all over the world. I mean, most countries are probably run by people like that. So it was fun to create him and to create what I was really looking forward to doing was creating this kind of roadmap. Like, how would you do it? How would you bring down American democracy? I mean, 200 odd years of democracy and install yourself as a permanent figure in the White House. But unfortunately, it didn't come to pass. But that kind of thing happens. It's happened to me before where I've had to rewrite things because history got ahead of me.
Well, politics and politicians get a lot of the headlines, but one of the things that I loved about Enemy at the Gates is that you also played with this idea of the people that are not elected, and some of these corporations that are really huge players in the way that that things happen in the world, and they're not responsible to anyone in the same way that our elected politicians are. Where did that idea come from to kind of steer into those waters?
Well, a few places really, but I've always been one of probably the most influential writers on me. I should say a couple of the most influential books are 1984 and Animal Farm. Maybe even more Animal Farm than 1984, which is the more famous book. And what I loved about Orwell is that he understood that it takes two to tango, kind of. There's a tendency to say, okay, Anthony Cook's taking over. He's a horrible person and everybody else is the victim. But it's not really the way it works. The victims in these kind of allow it and in many ways promote it. So I don't like to. I think it's really unfair to say, say in Russia, Vladimir Putin, what a terrible guy, but the Russian people are lovely. Well, they're not. They're really not. They support this guy. He doesn't, run around the country beating people up who disagree with him personally. I mean, there's a big machine behind him. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to portray, that as president of the United States, he can bestow a lot of favors on people, and also just the rank and file. Will they get out there and cheer and go to those things and they want him to become the dictator? And it's been that way for, probably all of human history. I mean, if you think about, the old kings and stuff and the way they live versus the peasantry, but the peasantry, many of them loved them. So, I like it. It's a little Orwellian, I guess, in a way, but I like to portray all sides of that.
So if we've established that Enemy at the Gates and Oath of Loyalty are a smaller arc within a bigger arc, where did we leave the story at the end of Enemy of the Gates, and where did we pick it up in the new book?
So that's interesting that when I was doing that, because, the stories were really, really linked. What I did was I took one of the last chapters from Enemy at the Gates, which was told from a character named Mike Nash's point of view, and I rewrote it to be from Mitch's point of view, and that starts the book. So there's no time gap between those books. In fact, the opposite is true. The oath of loyalty starts like a day before. And because I wanted to start that story with all the backstory and knowing what was, everybody remembering what was happening, and then moving forward. And to bring the camera in a little bit and make it much more of a personal battle between the President of the United States and Mitch. Because again, you've got really weird political stuff here in that Mitch, I don't think, would ever say, Anthony Cook is a bad guy. I've got to take him out. He's bad for America, because Mitch, believes in democracy. And Anthony Cook got elected. So, there's this trend in the United States, people saying, oh, well, he's not my president, whatever, it's not, Barack Obama's not my president, or Trump's not my president, but they are. That's right. That's the crappy part of democracy. Sometimes your guy loses. So, I rooted equally hard for Barack Obama and Donald Trump, to do well and to make America, stronger and more prosperous and all these things. But that's not the way a lot of people think. So Mitch would never do that. However, this is much more of a personal thing. Anthony Cook attacks him personally, and then he doesn't see him as the president anymore. He just sees him as an enemy.
It's so funny because at the beginning of Oath of Loyalty, they're kind of pulled into their respective corners and being separated by Irene Kennedy, like two children having to be separated, almost, which just kind of struck me as funny. I don't know, maybe I'm surrounded by little kids and I just saw the humor in that.
I think Irene Kennedy would 100% agree with that analogy.
Oh, what was it like to construct that part of the story? Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, just very much the idea that I wanted to pull the politics out of it, because the first book had been, very politically driven. And then I had to turn that corner and wanted to bring that focus in a little bit more on the two men and their motivations. And then Mitch thinking about, Mitch is getting older. I don't age him like Vince did, but he still has to evolve, and thinking about the way the world is now and what his role in it is, because you can't, he's a guy with a Glock, and that's super, effective in certain realms, but, not against, say, bad politics and stuff, or the internal politics of the United States. So he's trying to find his place in the new world, which is very different than the one Vince left him in. And it's kind of interesting because, Vince hasn't been dead that long, but the world has changed. The United States has changed.
100%. When you do realize that some things that you're thinking about are actually taking place in the real world, and you have to think, okay, how do I handle this? Do I just, go full in and then, see where the cards fall? Or is there ever a temptation to sort of play out a real world scenario in the book to see if you could solve the problem, if that makes sense? Or is that not the job of a novelist at all? And do you ever find yourself, like how could we unravel this? What would a good ending to this scenario be?
Oh man, that would be challenging. In fact, I feel like Vince was going in that direction in one of his books, Consent to Kill. And he was talking about how Mitch was going to kind of rework how the intelligence community functions and all this stuff. And that subplot kind of petered out because, and I'm convinced it's because once you really dig into it, you think, oh my God, this is kind of insurmountable. I mean, there's so many moving parts and so many problems. And, and human nature goes into all of it. So, I mean, I do love exploring that. I mean, like my first book was about a guy who started dumping poison into the U.S. narcotics supply because he thought it would stop the drug, people from using narcotics. And it was kind of this final solution. So those things are fun to do. But, with Mitch, he's much more satisfied working in a situation in which, there's a clear enemy. It's good versus evil, pretty clearly delineated. And then he can solve the problem, by frankly killing the evil people, as opposed to kind of these very grand Ludlum-esque sort of things.
The shadowy group that is the antagonist in a lot of ways in the story, with the double blind secrecy. Was that informed by any real world occurrence or group?
Not really. I think what I needed was a killer, a contract killer, who Mitch wouldn't be sure he could handle. And so that's a really hard thing to do if you think, because Mitch is the best in the world at what he does. Right. There was a guy in the past named Grisha Azarov who makes a brief appearance in this book, who was very close to being his equal, but you can't really get much better than him. So what I had to do was create a killer that worked, that was the anti-Mitch Rapp, just didn't work anything like him, didn't have any of the same attitudes or systems or anything, so that he couldn't counteract them by being better because they're so different. And so I wanted to feel like very much a real threat, because while you say, I mean, spoiler alert, so everybody should plug their ears here, but because Claudia is not Mitch Rapp, she's expendable in the series. Right. But you have no idea what's going to happen to her, and I won't say what happens to her, but there's a very real danger that, this shadowy group could succeed in killing her, and Mitch couldn't do anything about it because they're not going to come in with guns blazing. Yeah.
Well, spoilers, we'll stop tiptoeing into spoiler area and let folks grab the book and read it for themselves. When you're hearing this, Oath of Loyalty will be available everywhere. You can grab it in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobooks. Vince, do you ever listen to the audiobooks of your books?
I've listened to parts of them just to kind of hear George do it, and get that sound in my head, but I don't really do much in the audiobook. I'm definitely a person that likes to sit there read on the page.
Yeah. Do you ever find when you hear George's interpretation of the book, does that seep into your head? Do you start hearing characters like the way he portrays them?
Not really, because I've been reading Vince for so long. I mean, since the beginning, really. And so once you get that voice in your head, I don't think anything can dislodge it. It's really one of the problems that you have with audiobooks is that, if an audiobook reader decides they don't want to do it anymore, or they retire or whatever, and somebody has to take it over, it's really jarring to readers because, they're like, well, that guy's a great reader, but that's not Mitch Rapp's voice.
Yeah. Oath of Loyalty available everywhere when you're hearing this. If you haven't picked up Enemy at the Gates as well, go grab that. Read them in one sitting if you can, or at least in one in one concurrently, or back to back. They really need to be digested as one. I love the book. Kyle, as always, love what you're doing. Tell folks where they can find you online if they're not familiar with your work.
Yeah, at Kyle Mills Author, and that's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then, you can reach out to me via email through my website too, if you like.
Excellent. We'll link all that up to make it easy for folks to find you. Kyle, so good to catch up again. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Oh, always my pleasure.